Hello, Jim Golden.
Hello.
Hi, I'm really, really grateful that you've agreed to speak with me this evening. Well, it's your morning over in Portland. You are what I would think of as the collector. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I'm Jim Golden. I'm a photographer. I guess I'm an artist to an extent as well. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, USA. I'm a commercial photographer by trade. I also make a lot of personal artwork for myself. And a lot of my work revolves around typologies and collections. I think the overbearing ethos of all the work that I do, it took me a long time to see this, but I've realized that kind of in the last 5 years is I like to take everything at face value and boil it down to like the essence of what it is, and try and highlight the things that people might not immediately think of when they look at those things. And basically I like to take the ordinary and try and make it extraordinary, or like elevate the everyday is basically kind of what where my philosophy lies. And not only for my personal work and my artwork, but for my commercial work too. So in the commercial sphere, it's really great because we can take this like knife or a shoe or whatever and make it something that maybe you don't really think about too much.
Do you find that,
and then for my person
in your everyday,
I'm sorry, what's that?
In your everyday life, when you're just wandering around, I mean, are you constantly scouting out things to photograph? Are you constantly aware of the banal and how it could become something, as you say, extraordinary, even if it's the most ordinary thing?
Yeah, that's a big part of my daily routine. It's not even my daily routine, it's just like ingrained in me. Like I wake up in the morning and sometimes the light coming in the window, I'm like, where's my phone? Like, let me take a picture of that. My wife nudges me like, dude, don't get on your phone. But I see that. I just see it all day long. I grew up with a camera from a pretty young age, like maybe 10. And I've just been photographing the things I see all the time. Not from like a Martin Parr street photographer kind of thing, but in my own way. But yeah, all day long, every day, it's pretty much the biggest part of who I am in a lot of ways, is like seeing this stuff and then trying to express it or show it to other people. Whether that's like something on the street or light in a room or an object or a piece of fruit or 200 cameras. That's kind of my MO.
If my students want to go and have a look at your work, I guess they would mostly find it on your website, which is fantastic, but also you've got obviously your Instagram. On your Instagram, there are lots and lots of photographs of cars. Do you want to tell us a little bit about cars before we get on to collections of other things?
Oh yeah, I'm a car geek. I was kind of raised around a lot of cars and had uncles and dads that were car people, and I've had project cars my whole life. So I'm really like, I had a subscription to Car and Driver when I was 4. So I've just been really into cars my whole life. And I love cars. I'm really into cycling too. I've got a bunch of bikes. I love bikes. The majority of the car photos are taken from me riding my bike around with my camera around my neck, which is kind of ironic. But
can I ask something about that kind of way of collecting photographs? So it's fascinating to me. Here's somebody who makes photographs of collections, but you are actually a collector of photographic images then yourself.
Yeah. And some of the earliest like typology stuff that I did before the scissor picture, which was the beginning of all the collection stuff. Previous to that, I was working on all these photographs of cars on the street I was collecting them. And I actually had a show in one of my studios, and it was like the entire wall of like drugstore, 4x6 prints. There probably was 500, 400 4x6 prints that were all over the wall. And it was this like giant typology of cars on the street in Northeast Portland that I've seen from my bike.
Are these typologies really fastidiously observed? So do they have exactly the same conventions, for example, in each of them? I mean, again, this is something I want to look at with you in these kinds of photographs, where we have collections of different sizes of objects that are put together where they are the collective thematically or because of the same kind of object. But when you think about singular objects within a typology context, do you ensure that they stick rigidly to the kind of codes and conventions of composition and kind of other codifications that would link with typology?
I think that, like the car pictures, for example, not so much. Initially, when I was doing that work on the street, this is like 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, I would rigidly photograph the cars. There couldn't be any cars around them, and I would always do a front view and a full front view and then a full side view with no other cars around. And I kind of, after a while, let go of that rigidity because I was missing out on taking photos and using the photos of these other cars that I would see that I couldn't get that exact angle. So yeah, I'm not the Beckers when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I think of them as a typology in my own way, that kind of stuff where it's a survey, more than like this super precise typology. I guess, yeah, maybe I would use the word typology a little liberally, but that's the only way to really think about it in my mind. So
do you have a preference though? I mean, this is, I assume this was this work that you collaborated with, is it Kirsten Lane, the stylist? Did you collaborate with other people to build the earlier typologies, or did you get into the relationship much later?
The cars and things like that, the earlier stuff, I didn't. But like this image, me and Kristen worked on this. I also worked with another friend, Beverly James Neal, on some of the other stuff that you've shown in here. But yeah, most of this stuff is collaborations, and it's me running the camera and kind of art directing and them helping put these together. Now, so here's the thing, like these collection images, I don't think of them as typologies in a lot of ways. They kind of are, but they kind of, in my mind, aren't, which is confusing to a lot of people, but there's more surveys. The typology thing, I really do hark back to the Beckers, and I look at them as singular. That's more, and then arranged in a grid.
Yeah. So again, just to be really clear about this, especially for student watchers, when you review work such as this, you don't class this as typology.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I look at this as I look at it as a survey. The typology thing is just different for me.
And also, is this composite work, or is this work that is where each individual element is laid out exactly as it is? So for example, are all the sizes actual relative to each other in this work, or is there a little bit of going on?
Yeah, so this is the difference between the collections work and the relics work. So the collections work is all this stuff was part of this ethos with me making these pictures, was to do it in camera. So all of these are arranged on the floor and they're all photographed together in one shot. And the only post-production on this stuff is like taking out dust, and maybe if something's a little bit misaligned, we might turn it. But other than that, everything in the collection series, I think like 99 or 100% is all in camera. And I had, I kind of worked around the limitations of my studio and how high I could get my camera and things like that. So basically I would shoot with a a medium format camera, like about 12 to 13 feet in the air, on an 80 millimeter, on a 50 millimeter lens, which is like the equivalent of a 35 and 35 millimeter. And we could do a 10 by 8 foot area on the ground from straight overhead. And that's kind of the basis for all this work. I've done ones that are a lot bigger than this for commercial clients, where we would go into a warehouse and put the camera, 20 feet in the air. But I think the prime size for these types of collection images is 10 feet by 8 feet. I mean, they can get smaller too. That's like kind of the biggest you can go and still be able to see everything and appreciate it.
I mean, I was reading, a journalist who had studied your work was writing about you, and they said of you that you are in obsessive pursuit of perfection. And I wondered about that. I wondered if I could ask you about that. Are you in an obsessive pursuit of perfection? I mean, the obsessional quality of collection anyway is kind of interesting, but to not just have photographed somebody else's obsession, for example, you yourself, are you in an obsessive pursuit of what that collection might bring or mean?
I'd say no. I think there's been a lot of interviews and the interpretations. Everyone's like, oh, I'm OCD, or I'm a hoarder, or this or that. I actually don't have any collections per se physically. My house is too small and I don't have any storage. But the perfection thing, I mean, I want the images to look the way I want them to look, right? So the perfection thing in the images and making everything perfectly straight, yeah, I could say that, but I wouldn't say I'm in the pursuit of perfection. Like I'm not, like, if you live my life with me, like my yard is muddy, my house is messy, like, I'm not like, am I in pursuit of like the perfect image? I don't even think you could say that. I think it's more like this kind of work needs to be very precise, even if it's organic, in order to get that feel. So that needs to be perfect, but I think
do you think the perfection then is the perfection that we might talk about then comes from your life as a commercial photographer, where things have got to meet client demand and expectation?
Yeah, I mean, like when like pursuit of perfection and like technique and execution, timing, staying on budget, all that stuff. Yeah, for sure. Like even in my personal work, I approach it with a very professional and exacting attitude, where it's got to be done right and it's got to be done how I want it done, and that's the way we're gonna do it. Yeah, pursuit of that perfection for sure.
You said again somewhere else I was reading about, you said now that actually 75% of what you do is actually your personal work, your personal projects, and that is a transition away from doing almost entirely commercial work, I suppose. And one, I wanted to check if that is actually correct, and I wanted to ask further to that, if in the transition between making purely commercial work and then coming into this more personal work, I wondered if you would call your personal work fine art photography, and do you find your personal work more nourishing than the commercial work?
Let's see, there's a lot to unpack there. I would say right now, I think more because of the pandemic, I'm probably doing 75-25 personal work, commercial work. Yeah. It's been a slow couple of years for me, for sure. Pre-pandemic, I would say it was like 50-50, 60-40 commercial. I think of this as fine art work. And do I? I do. I find my personal work and my fine art work to be more satisfying than the commercial work, and with the caveat, there are those jobs. I actually just did one a couple of weeks ago that was enormously personally satisfying, because it was a job that a client that I've been working with for a little bit, that and an art director I've gotten to know over the past couple of years, and they supplied us with an enormous amount of product, and we were able to take the product and make these beautiful compositions. And it was kind of something in the back of my head that I wanted to do for that client for a couple of years, but never the opportunity hadn't presented itself. So that project was a grueling project. It was like a 14-hour shoot day where we're all crawling around on the floor, lifting up tiles, moving like heavy crap all day. But I found that to be really satisfying. There are those projects, but I think generally the work I do for myself, I find more fulfilling. I think if you ask any commercial photographer, they're going to say that, but I could be wrong. The thing with the collection pictures, I started making them. I started with the scissors, and then I did the camping picture, and then not sure what came after that, but I know that the cameras came pretty quickly after that. What happened was I started showing that work around, and all of a sudden it was the merging of the personal work becoming the commercial work. And I think that is what most commercial photographers want in their practice commercially, is to be able to make the work they would make for themselves, but essentially get paid for it, you know?
But I mean, what is the kind of, there's like a permeability maybe between the commercial work you have done and then how that's, I guess, fed into or is present in what you think of as your personal work, right? I mean, they inform, I think they must inform each other.
They do.
They're not isolated from each other in the sense that you are the golden thread running through all of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the collection work started with the scissor image, but that all came from working for companies like Nike and Adidas and doing the work for those companies where we would shoot with the camera up on the ceiling looking straight down, and you would make, Usain Bolt's running outfit, or you would have all the things that Olympic athlete would wear. So when it came time to photograph those scissors, I was pulling my hair out trying to show this like breadth of a collection. And then it dawned upon me, what if I put the camera up in the air and just laid them out flat on the floor?
Well,
and
I do want to ask you about the kind of more anecdotal side of that collection with the scissors, which is the one I changed it obviously so I could see the title, but this is the one that you're referring to, and it was your friend Rob apparently who asked you. He asked you to photograph his collection. Is that right?
No. I asked him to photograph it. He has been collecting scissors for years and years and years. And I saw he has his kitchen table is a hopper with a glass top and all the scissors in there. And I'm like, dude, I'd like to photograph those. And he said, oh, so-and-so's tried to photograph them and so-and-so's tried to photograph them. A couple of our other friends and our bigger group of friends. I said, well, will you pick out, if I bring you some bins to put them in, will you pick out your favorites? Give me like, I don't know, 700 or something. And he said, oh, no problem. And so he brought him over, and I literally, it took me a week to get to that picture. I worked on it every day between Christmas holiday and New Year holiday. And on the last day, I made that picture, and it was like,
You have said, this is a quote from you actually, that you are collecting human nature. What is it about these collections that you think is representative of human nature? When you're saying to you, like, here's 700 pairs of scissors, are you making any kind of, are you totally passive in the looking at those objects as the collection? Or do you invest something of a kind of narrative quality? Is it a story? If they are human stories, you've said that. So what is the human story of these collections?
I think, it kind of depends. It depends, like each of them are a little bit different. Like the scissors, I think is a good example of like of one person collecting. And I think there are people, not everybody, but certain people become, I don't want to say obsessed, but they are in, they're constantly seeking out these objects to bring in so they can have more for whatever reason, who knows why, but they like them, you know what I mean? Like Rob likes the scissors, and over time people know that he likes the scissors and they bring him more scissors, right? There's the barrette image. This woman out of the blue emailed me, hey, I have all these barrettes from turn of the century up until the 60s. They're all Bakelite. They're no plastic. They're all like ceramic or whatever. Would you photograph them? Sure. Why she collects, why she has 5,000 barrettes, I have no idea. But the thing is like, that's the part of the human nature that I think is like, it's like what people choose to hold dear. And then when I actually meet the people, it's interesting because it's always triggered by nostalgia and memory and things like that.
As other images in charge, as the photographer though in charge of, like, you have this incredible power, I guess, in the representation of these things. And I wonder, in the way that you choose to represent them, I kind of wonder how passive you are in that. I mean, is there any judgment in you as the photographer bringing this collection to us as the audience? Are you engaged with like a kind of, is there something political or bigger, as a kind of bigger thing about, I love the fact that you're saying actually there's a sense that if somebody knows that Rob likes scissors, people are going to say, well, actually, I have this spare pair of scissors, you can have them. That's a very different narrative, or kind of narrative, to the narrative that says basically I hoard stuff because I need things to feel happy in my life. They're all material objects. I've often wondered in your work if there's a comment on kind of modern materialism, consumerism, our culture is broken. I try to sort of, we talk about this, when we talk about your work. Like, are you giving us a narrative that's actually a dark underbelly of human condition?
No, it's not my intention to. I think people have drawn a lot of that out of it. People bring me their collection, I photograph their collection. It makes them happy. I'm interested in it, you know what I mean? And then we kind of go our separate ways. And it's not political. It's not a comment on commercialism or consumption. It's not a thing about, hoarding or mental illness or anything like that. Actually, that plays like very little into the whole thing. For me to make the pictures where the collection comes from one person, it's more of, they have this interesting collection that's dear to them. And it's almost an honor for me to be able to make this survey photograph for them.
Yeah. Now that I'm speaking to you, I get much more of a sense of honoring and respectfulness.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that to me is like, here's your precious thing. You're gonna let Jim, make a picture of it. You know what I mean? Which I think is kind of it's an honor for sure. And I also think it's a two-way street. It's like, I like it. It's interesting to me. They get something out of it. I get something out of it.
Why do you think this is interesting to you?
How do you mean?
Well, you've said a couple of times now that these collections are interesting to you. Is it simply that there's kind of like something, again, this idea of ordinary, extraordinary? Is it that something is extraordinary because somebody just invests in it in this way?
I just think it's extraordinary that someone would go through the length to collect 5,000 barrettes and organize them. Why? Who? The scissors? It's just like, when I look at the barrettes, it's kind of interesting. It's a color story. It's also, you can see the difference between older stuff and newer stuff. It's also something that, especially with like the barrettes, or maybe even the scissors to an extent too, and some of the other stuff, I'm not like in that world of like where I would look at a pair of scissors that's 200 years old that closely. When you have those in your hand, some of these shears that are 14, 18 inches long, that have been used in the tailor industry, like cutting cloth, that are from the 1830s, you're like, are you kidding? Like, just to look at that and you see all the wear marks and you see kind of how they were used. That something like that is it's kind of amazing because it's this everyday, ordinary object, but you can see how someone's held it.
This idea.
What's that?
We talked a little bit before we started recording, actually, about the idea that something, you know, we talked about the fact that you choose to put everything in one image together. Like when you're talking now about, for example, a set of shears from 1830s used by a tailor, and you can kind of tell the story about that individual pair. Why put them in the collection? You know, I'm going to just come to this because this is a singular object.
Right.
I wonder about it because your work to me is like exciting and really stimulating because there's so much to look at. But sometimes I can also feel like I'm a kid in a toy store. There's just like so much to look at that I'm overwhelmed. And maybe what I wonder is that, have you always wanted to give a voice to these objects through their collective quality, or are they important enough to have a singular life?
I think both. You know, when you see, so I think having them in a collective photo, like we'll just talk about the scissors, for example, there is all that detail and stuff. I actually did photograph a lot of those scissors on their own, probably about 100 of them as single pairs of scissors, because they just were overwhelmingly beautiful. But if you just had you know, part of my thing is like trying to express this too. So if you just have a picture of a pair of scissors on the wall, I don't know what kind of, how that's going to draw you in. When you see 400 pairs of scissors on the wall, all of a sudden you walk right up to them and you're like, what is this? Like, why, who, what, you know? Oh, look at this. Oh, that. Why is there a penny there? Oh, maybe it's for scale. Look at this one. This is a pair of scissors that has a crucifix on it. I've never seen that. I've never seen a 3-fingered pair of scissors. In order to express that, I would have to have, you know, MoMA, you know what I mean? To see all these giant pairs of scissors. So in that bigger picture, you can see all that. And that's part of the engagement. Like to see people walk up to that, and I've seen it when I've shown the photos, and be the observer watching them kind of get off on that. That to me is like, now you've taken an everyday object and you've drawn, you know, the random person off the street into this photo to think more about the scissors, you know what I mean? Or the cameras.
That's always been my experience of looking at your work, but also in my own observation of students looking at your work, is how long it actually takes to look at them. And I love that because I think there's something, you know, we live in this really fast-paced culture where things are disposable and it's like done, you know, out the way within a second. Our brains don't engage enough with what we're looking at, whereas your work really demands actually that we pay closer attention. I'm going to go back just to that one because I had wanted to speak, as you know, about color and your relationship with color.
Let's talk, before we get into that, let's talk about the flip side of the collection image of multi-person collection. And the cameras, it draws a lot of parallel to the scissors. So the cameras are all these cameras from the photo community in Portland. I made a call out to other photographers and filmmakers, bring me your camera. We're going to make this survey of cameras from all of us working in the arts or the commercial arts. And the cameras kind of had the same thing as the scissors in some ways too. There's a lot of wear on them. They're beautiful objects when you see them up close, but it's a group effort, right? So you're bringing, instead of it being an individual thing, it's more like bringing the group together. It's like a group think or a think tank of like, here are all our tools that we've used over the years to do all this stuff. Again, when this was a print that was made 8 foot by 10 foot, and it was at the front of a photo studio. When you walked into the photo studio, this was the first thing that you saw. And there are hundreds, literally hundreds, maybe more, thousands, I don't know, of photos of celebrity athletes and stuff in front of this photo, either posing with it or looking at it. So when you would walk in, again, you're having some of the greatest athletes in the world look at this photo and engage with the photo. So it's like anybody, when you come in, this is why the difference between a picture of an individual camera or a picture of all this together, the engagement is like that. So I just wanted to point that out too, the other way that it happened.
Do you think that there's, for you, is there a responsibility in, we've talked about honoring and being respectful, but is there a responsibility, you know, these people bring these things to you and you care about them. And not only do you care about the objects, but I wonder, when you make the photograph, are you caring about who will see it? Who will see what you gathered?
Yeah, I mean, my thing, yeah, I do. I want to make an interesting photo to engage the viewer. You know, other than that, no. You know, I don't like being respectful of the objects. I think we're kind of putting the objects on a pedestal, in a way, and elevating them from tools, and some of them, not all of them, into something else, into this object to be, you know, observed, not revered, but observed, you know.
Do you think that your photographs themselves could be gathered into a typology or a collection? In that, you know, here you are gathering objects, but the photographic image itself is an object.
I mean, I suppose they could. I don't know. In some ways, that to me is less interesting because it's almost too much. But yeah, I suppose they could.
I'm going to come back to circle onto color again now.
Okay.
We mentioned already this sense that, of course, there's the kind of permeable membrane between commercial and personal. Do you think your fascination with color has come from commercial work, or is color something that would pop to you anyway? Like, for example, do you think, you mentioned the Beckers earlier, you know, they are probably the best known typologists in the world. Their work is black and white. Have you ever been tempted by black and white? Has you been introduced by it, or what is it about color for you?
I think there's so much in the world of color that it's just, I don't know. I mean, I want to see the color 99% of the time. I want to see all those colors. When you look at this Beachcomber picture, the color here is like a little tricky though. It's a different thing in some ways, but like there's a picture I made during the pandemic of all these buoys. And to me, that it's like buoys I found riding my bike on the beach, and I brought them home. To me, that palette is so unique and special, like only a combination of like man-made and nature and time could make something like that. So I think in those instances, in this picture as well, there's this thing with color that it tells part of the story. That being said, I have been experimenting a little bit with black and white stuff, and I kind of don't know why. Because the color, I like the color. I was trying to push my boundaries a little bit, and those things are actually more in a typology thing. It's a single object, and I don't know. I mean, the Beckers, I feel like that work is like, when you look at that work, it has to be black and white just because of the rigidity of what they were trying to do. Yeah. Which is totally not what I'm trying to do, but yeah.
Even in this work, which is black on black, is it Murdered Out?
Oh yeah, the Murdered Out series, yeah.
But even though this is black on black, I still read this and register this as a color. It's a color image.
This is actually a color image. There's color in there.
Yeah. So even when you're photographing things that are black on black, there's the color creeps in. So it's always struck me that color must be very important to you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it just is. It's hard. It would be really, if you said to me, I only can make photographs in black and white the rest of my life, I don't know if I could do it. I probably would, but it would be hard. I mean, something like this is just like, the color story is amazing, right? I mean, I mean, I think it's true that the commercial aspect of my work has informed my appetite and palette for color. I don't think, like when I was in school, I shot all black and white. I don't think I did any color work. I didn't really do color work until I was out of university. And then I pretty much exclusively was shot color from that point on, just because I think it was an access thing too. But my sense of color, like in my early 20s after 4 or 5 years of uni, is really different, vastly different than it is now. Like I've had a whole another education in color since then, and a lot of it is through the commercial work. But color's pretty important to me, even if it's really subtle. It's like amazingly important.
And what about, if you can comment on it, I was reading that you kind of, I think the phrase was, taught yourself from the ground up about lighting as a commercial photographer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I went to school for photography, and I got a minor degree in graphic design, which I've never used, but I did take some commercial lighting and things like that when I was in school, but I assisted a little bit when I was in uni, and I got really turned off to commercial photography. I was like, I don't think I can do this and this and that. So I was like, I got to figure out another way to be involved in the photo community and work. And I learned how to retouch. I learned how to use Photoshop, and I retouched at a very high level. And that's how I was on commercial photo sets. But I saw how commercial photo sets worked, and I just wasn't that into it. Fast forward, I had been retouching for almost 10 years, and I was really burnt out on being in front of the computer. And I saw a way for me to start to make my own work commercially. And I was like, I want to do that. I want a studio, I want to make that push. And I bought a bunch of used lighting equipment, strobe flash lighting equipment, and I would tear pictures out of magazines that I liked, and I would bring them with me into my studio. And when I didn't have jobs, I would try and light a portrait or a product or a set the way I saw in these tears from the commercial advertising. And I taught myself how to light. Yeah. Very rudimentary. And then once I wrapped my head around that and the project started getting bigger, I started hiring really assistants that knew more than I did. So my lighting assistant, my first assistant, knew vastly more than I did. And I started learning from the assistants. And then over time, lighting got more and more and more complicated and grandiose. The funny thing is, in the long run, I went all the way back down to the most important light, the one light, which we're always trying to emulate pretty much, in my mind, is the sun. But a friend of mine pointed that out. You've boiled it down from 10 lights going off all at the same time to one. And that's what makes all these images. It's one light. So I just think it's funny.
I mean, I haven't put it in this presentation, but there's an image that we make a connection between you and Wayne Thiebaud, the painter, the pop art painter, does Cake, where you've got flasks, like thermos flasks, and they all have the same shadow cast.
Right.
But it's quite disconcerting. I'm sure that must be a composite image because of the way.
So that's one of the images that's a composite. Yeah. So like I said, 99% of them are in camera. That one's a composite. So those thermoses, where they're a friend of mine's at her coffee shop, and I would see them all the time when I went in to get coffee in the morning on the way to the studio. And I just was like, I just have to photograph those. And she's just like, you know, they're all dusty, they're up there. I'm like, let me just come in and get them down and photograph them. I'll give you a print. And I couldn't figure out how to make it work as a all-in-one photo, so I made it. I just did it as a singles and put them together.
I do have a question that's a very it's something for us to think about in class. When you photographed this, for example, and you have this lovely kind of gray blue lightness going back into nothing, is this just like a really long shot on a wide expanse of backdrop, or have you somehow photoshopped away or out the corner space of the studio, or how is this done? How do you get that in?
This is a tabletop photo on a 9-foot seamless. It's just a 9-foot wide seamless paper that's rolled out really long and then goes up, right? And then the one light overhead lights the whole space. So,
and again, just coming back to the notion of collection or singular object, what was it about this that made you photograph it on its own? Is it contains the collection of all those slides?
No, so the slide projector is like kind of a big part of the cornerstone of me being wanting to become a photographer. So this particular, it's not this particular item, but the particular kind of item that it is really important to me. Aside from the part in the Relics thing, so when I was a kid, my father always had a camera. He was a really serious amateur photographer, and he would always shoot slide film. And I would, as a even little kid, like maybe 5 or 7, I would really look forward to when he would get enough slides back that he liked, and he would put them in the projector. And then, you know, the lights would go off, and we would sit there and watch. He'd have the little screen out, and the sound of the machine, you know, that whole thing, and like seeing all the dust in the air, and the photos that we were there next to him most of the time when he took the picture, right? But seeing that romanced on the screen like that was what completely sold me on taking photos, and that's how my interest developed. So the slide projector for me is like a really big part of kind of like the romance of me wanting to be taking pictures. But in the Relics thing, there are some objects that are just singular. I think they didn't lend themselves to making compositions, you know, like if there were like 10 of these on the page, I don't think it would in the picture. I don't think it would do it. It didn't for me do it justice. So there's singles like this, the phone, the film projector, the typewriter. They were like interesting enough to stand on their own in some ways, whereas like the floppy disks and the cassettes and the micro cassettes and things like that, I feel like I wanted to make into patterns and things. And then this stuff is all that Relic stuff is all composed. So they're all shot as singles, and then the ones that are multiples are composed. Anyway.
Do your siblings share the same passion for photography?
No, they are my one brother he makes motorcycle racing motorcycle leathers, and my other brother is a analyst for budget contracts. So they're both kind of from the science background. I'm the creative one.
It's just what I often listen to artists I interview talking about family ties to photography or not. And sometimes photographers particularly, I don't know if there's almost like a sense of guilt, like I have to have got this from somewhere, almost like there's a contagion of photography in their families.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, like I got my interests from my father. My mom was creative more in a crafty way. But I come from a kind of a long line of tailors. and people working in the cloth trade. My aunt's a fairly prolific painter. My cousin's a photographer. I have another cousin who's a poet. You know, I mean, there's definitely a creative thread through both sides of my families, but not everybody. A lot of people there's a lot of numbers people and engineers and things too.
I'm just going to show this because this to me is extraordinary.
It cracks me up every time I see it.
Yes, I mean, I was showing my daughter this earlier. She's 11 and we were watching it together. She's like, just play it again, Mum. Play it again.
Yeah.
We watched it over and over because there's something almost, I can't work it out. Like, what is it? Tell us all about it.
Well, so this is kind of what the way my mind works, right? It's the fall and it's gourd season, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to make some gourd pictures. And I've been thinking about making pictures of gourds for a couple seasons, and because I occasionally would see really weird ones at like the farmer's market or something. And I was like, you know, what would be interesting would be to make, you know, a collection photo of gourds. I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then also to do some single pictures of the gourds, like maybe really dramatic on black, or, you know, but then I was like, well, you shoot a lot of stuff on black. Maybe let's try and switch it up. Maybe let's not make a collection picture. You know, I'm like, you know, what would be funny to me would be like, there's like a crazy cat lady. What if there was a crazy gourd lady who just was like, her gourds were like her pets, and, you know, and that just spiraled.
Piano tuner. Why is she reading the piano tuner?
That's just a book. It's not, it's the piano. The fact that she's reading the piano tuner is really the fact that the book is yellow.
Yeah. I didn't know if there was like some amazing subtext that I was totally missing.
No, it's very like my work is like very face value. It's like, it's supposed to be, you know, she's hanging out with her gourds and we're peeking in the window and she's like, why are you bugging me? You know, like she's, you know, I just think it's hysterical. And my friend Kirsten, who's the model here, it was like, it just fit her to a T. I didn't have to talk her into it or anything.
Stylist on your other work?
No, this is my friend Kirsten, who actually worked in the photo industry for a long time. The stylist was Kristen Lane, who actually doesn't work in the photo business anymore. But yeah, I thought it just would be fun. I'm going to be doing another one. I have a little series with this going now because people saw this and really liked it, and they were like, oh man, like blah blah, you know, just got into talking with some people. And so I'm going to do a Christmas themed one for next year. I couldn't get it together in time to do it, but I have that lined up.
You would do a crazy cat lady one, an actual crazy cat lady with her cats.
I could. I mean, it just seems a little bit kind of mundane though. Like it doesn't seem crazy enough, right?
Well, actually, I did mean to ask you this earlier. Like, when people have approached you to photograph their collections, have you ever said no to a collection?
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that's like, someone was like, oh, I have this great collection of thimbles, like for sewing, where you put it on your finger. And it just wasn't interesting enough to me. There were really old ones and this and that, but the shapes weren't that interesting. And I was kind of like, not really. There was someone from Eastern Europe that had a collection of sex toys that were just a little too weird, and it was a little like gross. I mean,
you don't want to go that out there.
I mean, I get it, you know, it's cool, but it didn't interest me in a way. It just was a little like skeevy. I don't know. You know, there was someone who had subway tokens from New York City. Again, the shapes weren't that interesting. I mean, the thing I think in the long run for most photographers is there's got to be or artists in general, it's like, if you want, or anyone really, it's like, if it's interesting to you, you're going to do it. You know what I mean? And if it's not, then you're going to say no. And sometimes I say no, you know.
Just got to watch it again and again.
It's pretty good. You know?
So this is the penultimate slide. And I put this in, as you know, beforehand. I told you that my year 10 class, working with people like Edward Weston, they've been looking at natural forms.
Mhm.
I mentioned that though this is black on black, you know, there's definitely a color image. Tell us about this work. Tell us about black on black.
I mean, this in particular wasn't, let's make a black on black image. I thought that so I think that produce and like natural objects are super interesting, like when you go to the market. And I kind of think of them in a way as like the ultimate everyday object. And there's a market right across the street from my studio, so I would go in there sometimes to get a couple things before I go home, and they always had interesting produce. And so, you know, I bought some of it and brought it back to the studio, and I was sitting with it and looking at it, and I was like, you know, the way to do this is to make it as interesting as possible to draw the viewer in. And what would that be? It would be to make this really close up, beautiful, like sensual photograph of these mushrooms. And I'm pretty sure they're on black plexi or perspex too. So there's a reflection.
Yeah.
I was trying to take the natural object and make it literally as far away as I think most people would perceive it. And it was to do it on black, make it really moody, put it on the plexiglass. And
I mean, I love this image. This is to me, this is just an exquisitely beautiful image in its own right, for no other reason than just looking at it to me is highly pleasurable. In the same series, you've got like a shopping trolley on the plexiglass because there's a reflection. So it's not just about natural forms, is it? It's about any object.
Well, I think maybe you might be looking at that gallery a little bit too literally. There used to be, it was like broken out, and I had like the moody produce in its own thing. But I can talk about the murdered out stuff too, which is a really different thing. This was kind of one thing. The murdered out thing was inspired by seeing a new family on the street that were like punkers. It was a punker guy and a punker girl, and they had a baby in a stroller, and those strollers sometimes are really ugly and weird colors, but they had rattle canned the stroller flat black in order to kind of fit in with their like all black outfits and leather jackets and combat boots. And so I actually saw this from the window of my studio with my stylist, and we kind of were like just giggling because we were like, oh my God, what if we murdered out, you know, a shopping cart, a big wheel, a little red wagon, a sled. I think there's a house in there.
There's a wheelbarrow, I think.
A wheelbarrow, yeah. Just like, because, you know, so the murdered out thing comes from, you know, hot rod culture where they would have a junky car and they would soup it up so it could go really fast and do all this crazy shit. But then the paint was really bad, so they would just either rattle can it flat black or like roll paint flat black, and it was menacing looking, you know. And so I just thought it was funny to take those objects and make them into like, you know, just something that they weren't. And then putting that on the plexiglass on the perspex was kind of a nod to like the iPhone and technology and like, you know, tech photographs that always have this reflection and everything. Well, you know, here's a wheelbarrow that's murdered out on the plexi. I mean, it's like ridiculous. It's like the most ridiculous thing.
I mean, you do like things that are, you've used the word esoteric in other interviews, But you like things that are kind of from the sublime to the ridiculous, really. It strikes
Yeah,
me. And a lot of your work
definitely.
is full of humor and good nature. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, like I think it probably some of the more interesting photos I've made have been funny photos, um, or photos involving some kind of tongue-in-cheek humor. I also think I like to make serious photos. You know, some of the photos are really serious too. You know, like some of the fruits and vegetables, but
I was going to say, I mean,
um,
this to me is a serious photograph. This is,
yeah, I mean, this is, yeah, totally. And like, you know, like the broccoli and the carrots and all that stuff, that to me is like, I'm trying to take this and make it art. You know what I mean? It's the same, like you talk about Edward Weston, it's the same thing when you look at those vegetables, you know what I mean? Like what people see in them and everything. You know, it's funny, I don't have a huge photo history background. And when I started doing this kind of work, a friend of mine that went to school for photo history was like, this is, he started bringing me books and I'm like, oh shit, I forgot about this stuff, I didn't even realize. And he's like, you're being influenced by this, you know that, right? I'm like, yeah, but it wasn't my initial thing, you know what I mean? So but going back through that photo history was really important for me. So anyway,
I mean, this is our last slide. I put it in here just because it is the nod to the season in which we meet.
yeah,
Is this still fine art?
I think so. People say, oh, it's too humorous and this and that, but it's in that context. I think, you know, fine art's a framework, dude. It's a context. So
Yeah, I do wonder about this. Like, what is there some kind of credo for fine art that it needs to be serious and you know, somber? No,
no,
actually, fine art can be funny and sweet and
yeah. As we've seen, it can be ridiculous when you tape a banana to a wall. You know what I mean? Like there's stuff like that. This is a person who collects this stuff. Like obsessively collects this stuff. But yeah, this was my Christmas card for the studio one year. I had this friend who collects it. I'll send you the link to his stuff. Yeah, and he sets all this stuff up during the holidays in Portland and disused storefronts. And it brings a lot of happiness, I think, to people. But yeah, I think this, again, it's just another person collecting this stuff, and you're like, I'm just like, this is amazing. Can we photograph it? Yes.
do you
You
think
know,
that your photographs are quintessentially American, North American?
um, I don't know how to answer that. I'm not sure. I don't know. I would like to think that at least some of them are universal, um, but I think they're, you know, I think you could say that in some ways, like this kind of a photo for sure. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. You know, I think like
One good
the
question
scissors,
at the end.
the scissors might be a little more universal, but then there's a picture of all the locks, and all those locks are from the railroads all over the United States that were collected by one person. So yeah, I don't know. You know, I think the beachcomber image, I don't know if that really is North American, like a photo that's made in the United States, because I think all the countries that have a shoreline deal with garbage on the beach.
It's just interesting
So
because, you know, I speak a lot to all different people about their work, and I speak to students all the time, obviously, about their work. And what I come back to many times is that you know, the presence of the person who makes the work is always the indelible part. And it's interesting in your work particularly because there's so, I mean, even as I said, you know, some of your work is featured in the Edexcel exam board here in the UK and England, as kind of an exemplar work for a collection that was linked to identity, for example. When you've got such strong kind of identity prompts in an image that's not necessarily about your identity. I wonder somehow if your identity is still in there, it's still projected, it's still part, of course, because you're in charge of it. You are the master of the ceremony of the photograph. But I think how much of Jim Golden is there in the photographing of a collection of someone else's dream, nostalgia, and history?
That's a good, excellent observation, a good question. I think that there is some of me in there, or a fair amount of me in there, because I've chosen to point the camera at this stuff, and I've chosen to do it in a similar way. And also, it's these things that interest me, and that's why the photograph is being made.
Yeah, there's definitely
So,
layers of identity, because I would
yeah.
say it's immediately obvious. I would probably be able, I may be presumptuous, but it's easy to spot a Jim Golden, right?
I personally think so, because I think there's a lot of work like this out there in the world, and I think these images that I've made this way are kind of a different standard, a higher standard than a lot of the other work that's being made. And there's also, I feel like there's kind of a weird thread of like the things that more are interesting to me, but it could be just from me looking at it. I don't know, because it's my work, you know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, of course it's mine, but yeah, I don't know. There's been more than one person that said that to me before. Although sometimes people bring this to me and say, "Oh, hey, is this yours?" No. And it's funny to me because I look at it and I'm like, it couldn't be mine for these 10 reasons, but for the casual observer, maybe not so much. So I don't know.
Does that mean that you're quite possessive about the possession of your photograph?
I don't know. It's kind of a funny one. I don't know. I don't think so, but maybe, maybe more than I think.
There's so much in this. I could keep talking to you about collections all day long. There's so much to talk about. Every single object we could talk about, couldn't we? And break that down. We could talk about any element of the technical aspects of your work, the brilliance of that. But thank you for listening to my questions and making yourself available, because I think this provides a really invaluable resource for my students and also for anyone else listening. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. The questions were really great too, and thought-provoking. And I like to impart the thought that anybody could make these photographs, and it doesn't need to be this technically perfect thing, but people should try. So
that's the takeaway. I think that's a wonderful finish. Thank you, Jim. And I think there's a lot of nourishing things in this for photographers, but just anyone who's interested in visual culture. Thank you.
Super. Thanks, Sandi.
Thanks.